So today's lesson class is going to be describing a character in depth. So we're going to be using the Peter Pan story that we've been reading, but we're going to use it to compare our characters. And we're going to describe Tinkerbell, Peter, and Wendy. Kind of the three main characters that are in this story. Now, this is going to be our example one right here first, and it's going to say, reread paragraphs 1 through 6 to learn about Tinkerbell and Peter, and then compare and contrast those two characters. Underline important information in the text that gives you clues about each character's personality. So it says reread these two paragraphs and underline. So I'm going to get my underlining tool, and actually I just changed the directions on myself because I think, yeah, the highlighter may be a little better, but actually I will use the galaxy. I changed my mind again. Might be one of those days. So remember, I'm looking for character traits of Tinkerbell and Peter. So the prompt tells me to focus on these 6 paragraphs to compare and contrast the characters Tinkerbell and Peter. This means that I need to describe things that are alike and different about these two characters. So I'm going to look for and underline details in the text that give me insight into their personalities. Paragraph 1. There's another light in the room now, 1,000 times brighter than the night lights. And in the time we have taken to say this, it had been in all the drawers in the nursery, looking for Peter's shadow, rummaged the wardrobe, and turned every pocket inside out. It was not really a light, as it made this light by shining flashing about so quickly, but when it came to rest for a second, you saw it was a fairy, no longer than your hand, but still growing. There's a girl called Tinkerbell, who is exquisitely gowned in a skeleton leaf. So paragraph 1 begins as Tinkerbell enters the room and immediately rummages or goes through furniture and clothing, searching for Peter's shadow. Her speed is made evident by the text. It made this light by flashing about so quickly. So I'm going to underline that key part right there, that detail, showing me her speed. I think that she is eager to please Peter and wants very much to find his shadow for him. Peter, however, seems self-absorbed. So let's see as we keep reading, because remember, he's kind of selfish. Let's see if we find anything else about him. Now, we also have another thing in here about Tinkerbell. It says exquisitely gowned. That means she was dressed very nicely. So let's look on paragraph 2. A moment after the fairy's entrance, the window was blown open by the breathing of the little stars. Peter dropped in. He had carried Tinkerbell part of the way. His hand was still messy with the fairy dust. So this part right here tells me maybe he's kind and caring, because it says he's helping to carry. He carried Tinkerbell part of the way. Tinkerbell, he called softly, after making sure the children were asleep. Tink, where are you? She was in a jug for the moment, and liking it extremely. She had never been in a jug before. Oh, do come out of that jug, and tell me, do you know where they put my shadow? Paragraph 5 over here. The loveliest tinkle, as of golden bells, answered him. It is the fairy language. You ordinary children can never hear it. But if you were to hear it, you would know that you had heard it once before. Tink said that the shadow was in the big box. She meant the chest of drawers, and Peter jumped at the drawers, scattering their contents to the floor with both hands, as kings toss halfpence to the crowd. In a moment he had recovered his shadow, and in his delight he forgot that he had shut Tinkerbell up in the drawer. So Peter kind of just ignored Tinkerbell. He got so excited. He locks her in that chest of drawers. So I learned that in paragraph 6, Tink found Peter's shadow in the chest of drawers, and Peter jumped at the drawers, scattering their contents on the floor. So that's one of his actions, his excited moments. So Peter jumped at the drawers, scattering their contents to the floor with both hands. Now what else do I know about Peter? Then he had recovered his shadow, and in his delight he had shut Tinkerbell up in the drawer. So that's going to be another one that I'm going to put. In his delight, he shut Tinkerbell up in that drawer. Peter's so focused on his shadow, he's not even thinking about Tinkerbell. So we have some of these traits that we've looked at that we're now going to use to explain how they are similar and how they are different. So I have this Venn diagram down here at the bottom. You'll see we have one about Wendy that we're going to use in a moment. And I'm just going to fill it in. So what do we know about Tinkerbell? Well, she is eager to please Peter. Now there's many more we can put in there. We know that she was a fairy, so we could put that in too. We know that she was fast, because remember it said she was darting about. Now, what do we know about Peter? Well, Peter is kind of the opposite of Tinkerbell because he wasn't eager to please Tinkerbell. He was kind of self-absorbed. Now, it does say that he carried her part of the way, so maybe that both shows that they're good friends, but he really was only thinking about himself during this moment. What else do we have? Well, they both rely on each other. They both need each other. Tink needed Peter, it seems like, to carry him part of that way. Peter needed Tink to help find his shadow. So they're both helping each other along the way. So that's a sample Venn diagram. So let's see what else we can add to it. Yeah, I think that's good. Tinkerbell and Peter are similar that they both rely on each other. Peter depends on Tinkerbell to find his shadow, and Tink relies on Peter to carry her during her travels, as we saw in that paragraph too. So I'm now good. We're going to try our next Venn diagram, which is Peter and Wendy. So this is our prompt over here, and it says reread paragraphs 27 to 31. Compare and contrast the characters of Peter and Wendy. And then it's telling us to underline dialogue or descriptions in the text, give you clues about the character's personality. So let's head back to that moment. Paragraph 27 through 31. And luckily, yep, it's all going to fit nicely on our screen. So remember, we're looking at Peter and Wendy. And let me get my drawing tool, and we're going to use, let's use this rainbow one this time, instead of the galaxy. So starting in paragraph 27. I wasn't crying about mothers, he said rather indignantly. I was crying because I can't get my shadow to stick on. Besides, I wasn't crying. So in paragraph 27, I see that Peter denies or says that he's not crying, even though he is. Why might he do that? Well, I think he's trying to appear strong, even though he's sad and frustrated. So maybe he's proud and thinks that crying makes him look weak. So let's underline this part right here. I wasn't crying. So now let's go on to our next part. And let's see as we keep reading if there's anything else that we notice. It has come off. Yes. Then when he saw the shadow on the floor, looking so draggled, she was frightfully sorry for Peter. So she has this emotion here. She feels bad for Peter. How awful, she said. But she could not help smiling when she saw that he had been trying to stick it on with soap. So here we already underlined it. I'm going to underline it again. So she also seems kind of judgmental, I guess. But in like a good humorous way. She's laughing at Peter's misery. How exactly like a boy. Fortunately, she knew at once what to do. It must be sewn on, she said, just a bit patronizingly. So this word patronizing means that she's kind of like looking down on him, saying like, well, don't you know that? So now that we've read this, what else can we infer? Well, we can infer kind of that Wendy's polite because she's showing that emotions of being frightfully sorry. But she's also mothering. She's patronizing to say, this is what you should do. Kind of like, how did you not know that? We can infer that Peter wants to appear strong when he says he's not crying. We might also see that both of them, they're not very shy. They don't go away and say, oh no, there's a stranger in my room, which I probably would be. So they have this conversation showing they're not shy, showing also that they're probably both kind of proud. They both think that they are the bomb. Peter's trying to show that by him pretending he's not able to cry because he's too tough. And Wendy's showing that she's proud because she's kind of thinking, I know how to fix the shadow. Which we see in this one right here where she says she couldn't help but smile. Notice he's trying to put on with soap. Now, I would have no idea how to put a shadow on, but Wendy seems to think it's pretty common knowledge. So let's fill out our graphic organizer right here. All right. So Wendy, what do we have for Wendy? Well, Wendy, she is polite. She's kind. She has those emotions showing that, hey, I want to try and help. And what else do we have? She's mothering, which came from that word. I'm going to put it in here because I like it. Patronizing. But I like it better when I spell it correctly. Saying, hey, this is what you should be doing. Kind of, how did you not know that? Now let's increase it so we can see it all better. And let's do 26. So now, what do we know about Peter? Well, remember from what we underlined, what we found out about Peter is that he appears strong, or at least he wants to appear strong. What else do we know about him? We know that he doesn't like to cry. So he wants to not just appear strong, but to me that appears, he wants to appear like a man. Because there's a saying, whether true or not, that grown men don't cry. And then they also have a saying, the opposite, that says grown men do cry. So now, what do we have for how they were similar? Well, we have that they're similar because they're both proud. They both think they are the bomb. They both think that they know best. And then what else do we also know about them? Well, we also know that they're not shy. Because remember, they were having this conversation with someone that they've probably never met before based on our passage in the text. So that's how we can describe characters, through using their words and actions, and we can see how characters are the same and different even in a small text. I hope you guys found this useful and that you will incorporate your characterizations into your fairy tale writings that are due.